Today, we're going to dive into the heart of the US-Iran conflict. And this is a battle where the fight isn't just with missiles and jets, it's a fight with words and narratives. We're going to deconstruct two completely different, totally incompatible stories about what's really going on.
So, on one side, you've got the American story. It's a tale of absolute confidence, of overwhelming success. The narrative is simple, it's clear, the war is going unbelievably well, and the enemy is right on the brink of total collapse.
And then you flip it around, and you hear from Iran. And this is not a story of defeat. No, not at all. It's a story of defiance. They're framing their actions as a direct response to what they call a disgraceful act, and they're making a pretty chilling promise. This fight is far from over.
So how is this possible? How can two realities that are so different exist at the exact same time? Well, to figure that out, we're going to break it all down. We'll look at the core narratives, the conflicting claims from the battlefield, the really tragic issue of civilian harm, the attacks on leadership, and finally, how each side even imagines the endgame.
Okay, so just to be clear, our goal here isn't to declare a winner or, decide who's telling the truth. What we're doing is laying out these two completely competing versions of reality that are being built by both the US and Iran. Each side is telling a story where they are absolutely winning.
All right, let's get into the real nitty-gritty, the military scorecard. This is where we see two completely different wars being described, and it's where the accounts just diverge dramatically.
And wow, just look at this. The disconnect here is just total. On one side, the US is claiming they've basically wiped out Iran's entire navy, its air force, and most of its missiles. But then you look at what Iran says, and they insist their missile stockpiles are fully intact and that their operations are just continuing. These two things just can't both be true.
And the American claim isn't some vague statement. They put a hard number on it, 44 ships. They're not just saying they've damaged the Iranian navy, they're saying they've wiped it out. That kind of specific number is meant to project an image of just absolute dominance.
So Iran's response is basically a really simple, logical question. It's like, okay, if our military is so completely destroyed, then where are all these missiles coming from? They're using their ongoing strikes as proof that they are still very much in the fight.
This information war, it doesn't just stop with military targets. It gets into one of the most tragic parts of any conflict, civilian harm. And in this case, one single horrific event has become a huge point of contention.
We're talking about a girls' elementary school that was bombed on the very first day of the war, a terrible loss of life. And almost immediately, the finger-pointing started, with each side just blaming the other for this awful tragedy. So the US position here is, well, it's absolute. They're saying, look, as a rule, as a matter of doctrine, we do not target civilians, period. And they say Iran is the only side in this conflict that does. So for them, the blame for the school bombing lands squarely on Iran.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures that certainty. The US president says that based on the evidence, it was Iran. And the argument is that the strike was done with the kind of inaccurate weapons that they claim Iran uses.
Okay, so let's shift gears now. Let's move away from the battlefield and look at the command centers. Because beyond the military hardware, this information war is also being fought over whether Iran's leadership is even stable anymore. So the story the US is pushing is one of total chaos in the Iranian command structure. They're claiming they've wiped out their leadership numerous times already, which paints this picture of a government that's just in complete disarray. But Iran's response? It's the complete opposite. It's a message of rock-solid unity. Officials are saying, hey, far from being divided, our leaders are totally united in fighting the US. They're framing this whole thing as something that actually strengthens their resolve. And to prove they're stable, they point to the fact that, hey, the gears of government are still turning. They're highlighting that their leadership council is making arrangements for the assembly of experts, which is a really key part of their government, to meet and do its job. It's a signal that for them, it's business as usual. So where does all this go? If you can't even agree on the basic facts on the ground, how on earth are you supposed to agree on what winning even looks like? And as we're about to see, the gap between how each side defines the endgame is, well, it's a giant chasm.
Well, for the US, the endgame is pretty straightforward. It's total victory, defined as unconditional surrender. And the language here is really stark. The war ends when the enemy gives up completely or when there's nobody left to give up. In this version of the story, there is zero room for negotiation.
Iran's idea of how this war ends, it's on a completely different planet from the American one. We are not talking surrender at all. It's about setting brand new terms. They're saying the war will only end when the US accepts it can't attack them anymore, when it pays for damages, and this is the key part, that their strikes are going to continue until those conditions are met.
Which leaves us with a really big, critical question. In a conflict where every single fact is up for debate, from how many ships were sunk to what it even means to win, the battle for the story becomes just as important as the battle on the ground. And it forces you to ask, when reality itself is a weapon, who ultimately gets to write the final story?